Hi everyone. It's nice to be on one of these Locus events. I am a great fan and supporter of Locus, and I thank you for your support of Locus. It's a really important part of our community. I've been involved with Locus since I was a teenage bookseller at a science fiction bookstore in Toronto. And I used to gobble it up when we got our stack of new issues every month, even before I put aside the issues for our regulars. And then I would sell the heck out of it. So I've been reading Locus since the 1980s, and very proud to have been a columnist for it now for more than a decade. I think we're coming up maybe close to 2 decades at this point. I've lost track. The book I'm going to read to you today, or from today, I'm not going to read the whole book, is called The Bezzle, Bezzle, not Bezel. That's the black rectangle around your phone. Bezzle is a very useful term coined by the great economist. Gosh, I just lost his name. I was going to say by the great economist Francis Scott Key. That can't possibly be right. John Kenneth Galbraith. or Francis Scott Key. Why not? His secret, I'm going to write an alt history now where Francis Scott Key was an economist. So the bezel is this term coined by John Kenneth Galbraith, and it describes the magic interval after a con artist has your money, but before you know it's gone. And during that time, everyone feels better off because you think you've got a big return coming, and they know that they've got your money and you're not getting it back. And a lot of our economy seems to swing from one bezel to another. The great financial crisis, when the passage, or when this book that I'm going to read to you starts. More recently, we have things like the cryptocurrency bubble, and now the AI bubble, this series of bezels. This is the second Martin Hench book. Martin Hench is my aging forensic accountant who specializes in unwinding high-tech scams. The first one of those books was Red Team Blues. It's the one that's a finalist for the Locus Award. It was one of the 9 books I wrote in my backyard in my hammock during lockdown. I write when I'm anxious as a kind of displacement activity, and so COVID meant that I got a lot of writing done. And in Red Team Blues, Martin Hench retires. It is the final volume of a long-running series telling the adventures of this beloved rapscallion forensic accountant, with the gimmick that I never wrote any of the other books. So I just wanted to write a book that had that kind of last day of summer camp energy of being the last volume in a series without bothering with the tedious business of the other books in the series. My editor liked it so much that he insisted on buying at least 2 more. I have now finished those other 2 books. This one is The Bezzle. The one that comes after, I just got the copy edits from Tor on. It's called Picks and Shovels, and it'll be out in February of next year. And I kind of moped about how I was going to manage this command performance here, because I really did want Marty Hench to have retired at the end of The Bezzle. And then I had a revelation. I realized that this has some precedent. Very famously, Arthur Conan Doyle killed off Sherlock Holmes, and then Queen Victoria came along and said, "If you bring him back, I'll knight you." Now, my editor, Patrick Nielsen Hayden, was then a vice president at the Macmillan Company, very powerful man in New York publishing, but he couldn't knight me. And so I had to come up with something else, and I realized I could tell these books out of sequence. I could tell the story in any order, and that if I ran them backwards, that I wouldn't have any continuity problems, because all the foreshadowing becomes backshadowing, and the more detail you just make up and throw at the wall, the more premeditated you seem to be. And so that's how we arrive at today's reading. This is a book that starts 20 years before Red Team Blues and spans about a decade. It starts in the great financial crisis and ends the beginning of the Trump years. And it's a high-tech techno-thriller, a revenge thriller about prison technology. And that's where today's reading opens up. San Genesius State Penitentiary is located just outside of Vacaville, about 3/4 of the way between San Francisco and Sacramento, set far enough back from I-80 that they don't have to post the usual signs about not picking up hitchhikers. It's a brooding place, the way prisons tend to be, H-shaped, with an original 1930s cinderblock building as the crossbar and 2 60s vintage wings on either end. Designed to house 700 inmates, home to 3 times that number. It smells, and the floors have lost their finish from prisoners' endless mopping, exposing rough aggregate surfaces that have absorbed an endless shower of fluids and misery. The first time I visited San Genesius was in late 2012, 4 months after Scott surrendered himself to the California Highway Patrol Detail in Redway, California. He was accompanied by his lawyer, a very expensive fellow from a Silicon Valley firm who specialized in getting diversion or other wrist slaps for rich techies who got caught with Schedule II narcotics. He usually succeeded, but not in Scott's case. It wasn't even Scott's cocaine. I know that sounds like the kind of bullshit anyone who got busted would say, but I believe him. I enjoy a little coke now and again, but Scott doesn't. I'd seen him pass on so many bumps and lines. For Scott, it was magic mushrooms as a daily driver, LSD for special occasions, and mescaline, peyote, salvia, DMT, and even ayahuasca when he wanted a true blowout. Scott just wasn't a coke kind of guy. Scott wouldn't say whose cocaine it was. He wasn't a snitching kind of guy either. It was that refusal to throw someone to the lions that cost Scott his freedom. The cop who busted Scott, doing 95 miles per hour on a winding stretch of the Pacific Coast Highway that was posted at 35, which was an idiotic thing that was, unlike cocaine, perfectly in character for Scott, found the coke when his dog alerted on Scott's car. It was down the side of the passenger seat in a little baggie containing precisely 9.01 grams of powder cocaine of middling quality. That 0.01 was important because 9 grams is the threshold for an intent to sell rap, which is a Class B felony. Scott's fancy lawyer could have gotten him diversion if Scott had coughed up the name of whatever friend had been riding in his passenger seat. Instead, he kept mum, and the prosecutor, furious with him and intent on sending a message, made sure the judge knew that this was Scott's third felony rap. The felony assault on an officer and felony possession charges from Catalina Island filled out his rap sheet. 3 strikes. In 2011, a third felony conviction meant an automatic 25 to life sentence under a vengeful 1994 law passed by state ballot initiative following the grisly murders of a teenager and a little girl. By 2012, that was softened thanks to another ballot initiative motivated by a combination of horror at the state's bursting prisons and the cost of supporting so many young men who'd grown so old in those same teeming lockups. Scott was arrested in late 2011, just after Thanksgiving. Bad timing. Scott was serving 25 years to life in the minimum security wing of San Genesius State Pen, and I didn't know about it until I sent him an email and got an auto-response warning me that he was, quote, away from my desk for the next quarter of a century. I'd left San Francisco early, but I was still nearly late. I was 20 minutes en route when I remembered that I wasn't allowed to wear any blue denim and had to race home and change out of my jeans. The rules for visiting Scott were so complex that I'd actually printed a checklist, e.g. spare keyring with only 2 keys, but I'd forgotten about the jeans. The checklist was just the latest hurdle in a series of bureaucratic steps, starting with mailing Scott a letter requesting that he send me a CDCR 106 visitor questionnaire, which I then had to send back to the prison administration, who took a month to approve it. I got 5 $10 rolls of quarters at the bank and loaded them into a clear plastic bag along with my driver's license. Everything else stayed in the trunk. I handed my CDCR 106 and submitted to a search and metal detector scan, then sat tightly in the visitor's lobby with the other visitors waiting to be called into the visitation room. Mine was the only white face in the lobby, apart from the guards. The largest group of visitors were young, sad women, often with kids. The second largest group was older people, with the wrung-out look of demoralized parents of adult children in crisis. Wives, kids, and parents amounted to 3/4 of the visitors. The rest were young men, or friends, or maybe siblings, staring hard at the floor or whispering to one another. I was nearly the last one to be called. I followed a guard, an older white guy with volcanic acne and a pronounced limp, into the visitation room. It was crowded, and the ancient body odor stink was overlaid with the odors of fresh scrubbed kids and the desperately cheerful perfumes of the wives and girlfriends. Scott and I were assigned a table right in the middle, between a young black man and his sorrowing parents, a middle-aged Latina woman visiting a middle-aged man who looked enough like her that they were probably siblings, a black woman and her teenage son visiting their father behind me, and behind Scott, a Middle Eastern boy, barely 18, visiting with a girl no older than he, tears coursing down his cheeks while her shoulders shook from soft, hiccuping sobs. Scott was already at the table when I entered, shorn of his ponytail with a few days' facial stubble, looking doughy and hollow-eyed, not so much scared as just disappeared. He registered me when I'd slid into my seat, a quick flick of his eyes. "Hi, Scott." "Marty," he said, in a numb voice, barely audible over the sounds around us. "Jesus," I said, "can you appeal?" He shrugged and hitched half a grin at one corner of his mouth. "The lawyers will take whatever I give them and spend it, but the law's the law. 3 strikes, you're out." His eyes flashed a little. Oops, I don't know why it's not advancing. Oh, there we go. No, I can't get it to advance. His eyes flashed a little. They didn't like that I wouldn't name names. They knew it wasn't my stuff, but they wanted to punish someone, and so if I wouldn't give them a name, they'd make an example out of me. At least I was able to set things up so that my lawyer would pay into my commissary. He patted his bulging stomach. "Keeps me out of the mess hall." I was briefly at a loss for words. "Are you really going to spend 25 years here?" Again with that half smile. Like everything else about that Scott, it was recognizable as a distant cousin to the happy-go-lucky guy I'd spent all those weekends with on Catalina, but only just. This Scott looked like a lossy JPEG of himself. They tell me I can get a third off my sentence for good behavior. We talked inconsequentialities for a while, mostly me just quizzing him about how I could help him, what I could send, who he wanted to hear from, what I could relay to people on the outside. Finally, I couldn't stop myself from asking, "But Scott, how the fuck are you gonna do this? Brother, you look half dead and it's only been 4 months. 25 years is a long time, but it's not forever. I don't want you to die in here. There's got to be a way to help you get through this. Can I sign you up for college classes? Anything?" Again, the flash in his eyes. "It's not my job to figure out how you can help me, Marty. I'm the one in prison." That rocked me back. He was right, of course. "I'm sorry," I said. "What if—" I stopped. What if? What if I go talk to some lawyers, some advocacy organizations? What if I get you some magazine subscriptions?" He nodded. "I'd appreciate that," he said. I think he meant it, or at least that's what I told myself. The drive home seemed twice as long as the drive up. I had to stop twice because I found myself crying. I was certain, absolutely certain, that Scott would not survive. I had just spent an hour with a man who was fixing to die. What's more, I didn't blame him, not one bit, and that made me cry all the harder. 6 months later, he was a different man. "Marty fucking Hench," he said, grinning broadly and drumming the table with his palms. He threw his arms open, though he didn't rise for a hug, and gestured to my visitor's chair. Other prisoners and their families turned to stare at us briefly, then returned to their business. "Scott Worms," I said, sitting down. "You look amazing." He did too, still pale, but fitter than the last time, his prison-issued jumpsuit no longer bulging at the gut, clean-shaved, hair buzzed to an all-over half-inch. "What's your secret?" "Magic," he said. He grinned, that whole Scott Worms grin this time, and waited for me to bite. I bit. "Do go on," I said, grinning back. "We've got a really good Dungeons and Dragons group here," he said. "They've been playing for about 10 years now. There's a guy who makes miniatures and dice out of toilet paper mache. And when they sweep the cells and confiscate the dice, we draw dice rolls out of decks of cards. The GM has been inside since the 1980s, but he actually knew Gary Gygax, and he's had people on the outside who've been sending him books and modules in his quarterly packages for decades. He's published two character classes in Dragon and 4 modules with Judges Guild while he was inside, though all the money they earned went to restitution for that liquor store owner he shot. That is a lot, I said. Give me a second. His smile widened. Okay, maybe start with the liquor store owner? Scott shrugged. It was a long time ago. Evan was strung out at the time. The guy lived. Evan's done 20 years and he hasn't touched heroin for decades. I'm not going to judge this guy by the things he did on the worst day of his life. He shrugged again, then the grin came back. Man, that guy is a hell of a DM. And then he told me about his D&D games. No, really. Scott was a pretty good storyteller, but D&D games are like dreams. More fun to have than to hear about. There were some pretty funny moments when Scott's cleric rolled up some consecutive critical fails and healed the boss troll his party was fighting, but for the most part, it was an eye-glazing half hour. Not that I begrudged it. It was Scott's time, and he needed the freedom to spend it the way he wanted, way more than I needed to direct the subject of conversation. When the story wound down, I got up to leave, and so did Scott. We're allowed to hug, he said. Okay, I said. He always was a hugger. It went on for a while, and then I felt his fingers work at the waistband at the side of my pants, tucking something in there. I immediately felt like every person in the room was staring at us, guard, prisoners, and visitors. But no one seemed to notice. They were all wrapped up in their own drama. I drove back to I-80, then pulled off at a truck stop, parking far from any of the other cars before I fished in my waistband. It was written on both sides of a quarter sheet of thin paper, folded twice. The writing was cramped so tiny I had to squint. Marty. My DM has an old friend on the outside who gets him sheet of blotter acid disguised as graph paper for games. A first-generation hippie chemist who learned his brew from Owlsley. The D&D club plays, but we also have a monthly trip. I was skeptical at first because I couldn't imagine having a bad trip while locked in this cage, but I was wrong. It literally saved my life. We start our trip together in the day room, play a while, get very silly, then we just start telling each other stories. We get pretty weird, but everyone who hears us assumes that it's part of the game. The DM has been making up his own variant rules for a quarter century, and honestly, the stuff we say when we're tripping is not much weirder than the stuff we say when we're not. So long as we move our miniatures and roll our dice, everyone assumes it's all fine. Then we go back to our cells and they lock us in and we finish out the trip in our bunks or with our cellies. We don't tell them, though they probably suspect something. But here's the deal. The DM is getting out. And he's not going to risk his parole by sending contraband inside. The risk of getting caught is low, but he's a felon mailing graph paper back inside. So for him, it's higher. Marty, I have a favor to ask. All right, well, thank you.